Welcome to this installment of Dave's Door Opening. This video will cover the basic steps to properly shim a door. The instructions you see can be used in any type of door, steel, wood, fiberglass, or aluminum, using butt hinges. We recommend using small shims instead of the full width shims you sometimes see in the field. The smaller size shims can achieve more movement and can be used to either push the door to the lock side or even pull the door towards the hinge side. You can see we have two types of shims in this picture. The metal shim on the left is for fire-rated openings. The plastic shim on the right is for non-rated openings. We do not recommend using paper or cardboard for shim material. Both these materials will break down over time. You can buy shims with stick-on material on one side for easy installation. Check your local hardware store for more information. This chart shows placement of the shim and the effect on the opening. If you have a gap on the lock side you need to reduce, you simply add required shims to the edge of the frame closest to the barrel of the hinge. This will push the doors towards the lock side of the opening. Always tighten the two hinge screws opposite the location of the shim first. This will maximize the effect of the shimming. This chart also shows placement of the shim and its effect on the opening. If you have a gap on the hinge side you need to reduce, you simply add required shims to the edge of the hinge farthest from the barrel of the hinge. This will pull the doors towards the hinge side of the opening. If you only need to close up the hinge side gap on the top of the door, add shims only to the top hinge, farthest from the barrel of the hinge. Keep in mind, when you only shim the top or bottom hinge, you will also lift the lock side of the door in the opening. For example, if you only shim the top of the door, pulling the door towards the hinge side, this will also decrease the gap at the top edge of the door on the lock side and increase the gap on the lock side towards the top. If you only need to close up the lock side gap towards the top of the door, add shims only to the top hinge. Just like the previous chart, if you only add shims to the top hinge, you will drop the lock side of the door in the opening. This will also increase the gap at the top of the door on the lock side. Always tighten the two hinge screws opposite the location of the shim first. This will maximize the effect of the shimming. Here's a very typical opening. You will notice that the gap on the top hinge side is a bit large, and the gap on the top lock side is almost non-existent. Also note the large gap at the top of the door on the lock side. To correct this issue, we will install shims in the top hinge opposite the barrel side of the hinge. Start the shimming process by removing the top hinge butt on the frame. Set the hinge screws to the side. Remove protective film from the sticky side of the shim. Note how we pop the hinge out of the frame by hitting the door with our hand. This saves from trying to pry the hinge butt out of the frame. Place shim in the correct location. For this application, the shim will be placed away from the hinge barrel. Install hinge screws back into the hinge butt. Note you will always install the two screws opposite the shim side of the hinge butt. This maximizes the effect of the shimming. Here's the before and after pictures of the gaps on the doors. Notice the gaps are now more uniform. The door moved away from the lock edge and closer to the hinge edge. We have pulled the door towards the hinge edge with just a shim placed at the top hinge.